Stumbling home, we don't know where we're going. Should've turned back hours ago. Out of our minds, I guess we're sleeping outside. You're still a good time, even in the cold.
Hello, welcome to Defender Adventure. We are Paul and Chrissy from the UK, and with our Land Rover Defender that we have called Sterling, we are travelling the world.
Guess we need a new plan. There's a motel a mile down the road.
Yes, it was a few days before the Christmas of 2017. We had recently completed an 18-month-long project at a Scottish whisky distillery, and Chrissy and I got to know the area quite well. We had rented a house for the Christmas break not far from the distillery and invited our children to come up and see us and see the new year in. That year of 2017 had been quite a stressful one, but anyone running their own company will know that it's pretty much stressful all the time. You either have too much work, too little work, you have to manage staff, you have to manage clients and subcontractors and suppliers and the tax man and the banks. And to be honest, that Christmas break came at just the right time.
And it was on the first week, walking the neighbours' dogs up in the hills and snow, that I don't think Paul ever switches off work. He was thinking about work and not looking forward to returning to work.
I did mention to Chris on one of the walks that I wasn't really looking forward to starting back in the new year, and it was her reply that eventually led us to change the direction of our lives, I guess. She just said as an off-the-cuff comment,
well, why don't you finish work? Stop work.
I think she said it probably without any real meaning to it, but it was just out there, that question. Why not? Can we? We'd never discussed this before, and I think we both felt that we would just continue to work until normal retirement age, like the majority of people. But what she said struck a chord, and we started to really think about the matter quite seriously on that walk. Excuse me. Obviously, it triggered a lot of questions. No more money, no more work means no more money coming in. How much money do we need? Well, that depends on how long we're going to live, what we're going to do. So, and we just spent the next hour talking about hows and what ifs and could we's. One of the biggest factors in answering that question was money, finances. And once we finished the walk and got back, we spent the rest of the day reviewing our finances, and I think we came to the conclusion that we might possibly be able to afford to stop work if we sold our house and moved to a cheaper area. When we discussed moving house, I said to Chrissy that I'd always wanted to move somewhere warm, where I could put on shorts and t-shirts in the morning, maybe somewhere like Southern Europe, France, Italy, Spain.
And I was, I like the idea, but there's always a language barrier for me, and where we would move to, we would be more remote. And so I didn't want a language barrier. I would find it hard to learn another language. I have a problem with English.
I said I understood. So I started to list countries where they spoke English, but the weather was pretty good most of the time. Countries like New Zealand, Australia, South Africa, even Canada and America, the Caribbean.
And for me, they were too far away from the family. I would miss my children, and just recently became a nana, and I wanted to spend time with my granddaughter.
But she pretty much said no to all of those on the basis that they were too far away. She didn't want to be too far from family, which I also understood.
More for me, I liked Scotland.
So yes, Scotland. Scotland is at times the coldest and the wettest parts of the UK. I don't think they even sell shorts and t-shirts in Scotland. But to be fair to Chrissy, we got to know the area, and the Moray area that we've been working in was stunning. The beautiful coast, the mountains. Within an hour we could be in towns like Inverness and Aberdeen and skiing in Abermore. So yeah, I it wasn't my initial plan, Scotland, but we decided that that was somewhere we could both be happy. We happened to mention our discussions to one of our neighbours, the neighbour who we took his dogs walking, and we happened to mention to him that we were thinking of maybe buying a house in the area. It turned out he was an architect, and within minutes we were in his car and we were being driven all around the area, houses for sale, land for sale. He was showing us everything, and we actually came across a plot of land that Chrissy and I both loved, and we loved the location of it, feeling of isolation, but only 15 minutes from the nearest town.
It's up in the hills, surrounded by forests. I like the idea of designing my own house, and I quite looked forward to that.
We both got quite excited, but then we had to put the matter on hold for a little bit. The kids came up, the children came for a few days, and it was a welcome distraction really. We did take them up and show them the plot. We told them that we were considering maybe buying a plot of land, and what did they think to the idea. But most of the time was spent with them, enjoying the countryside, and we had a great time. We had great laughs. But after their few days, they went back home, and we were pretty much straight back into discussing the idea of moving house and stopping work. Whilst I started to get quite excited about the idea of stopping work, Chrissy had actually maybe started to have some second thoughts.
And our conversation went back to shall we retire, close the company, and I got worried, scared myself, no more money, and I suggested maybe a couple of more years working, saving hard, and then close the company. I think would maybe be better for us.
It wasn't my most desirable way forward, but it was the least scary option. The better the devil you know. So we did. We left Scotland. It was the first time we discussed retirement, but I think we parked the matter for a little while. Yeah, then things changed. We had a death in the family. My father died of a heart attack when he was 58, and my mother, who was only 54 at the time, she remarried some years later to a Yorkshireman called Tony. And Tony was 55 when he married my mother. And On this day I was stood at the foot of his bed in the hospice. He was now 70 and this would be his last day, and he was dying of pancreatic cancer. When people die young, I always like to think that there's some sensible reason behind it. Oh yes, he's died of lung cancer but he smoked 40 a day, or yes, he's had a heart attack but he was morbidly obese, or he's just had a car crash but he was driving under the influence of drink and drugs. But Tony wasn't. Tony was just a normal guy. Tony was suffering with a terrible disease that anybody could suffer with at any time. And I thought, I'm 55 now and Tony's 70. In 15 years time that could be me. And so I remember leaving the hospice and I turned to Chrissy and I said, that's it, come on, we're stopping work. Money's not everything, we'll find a way to make the money work. So I think it was the very next day we began the process of closing the business. We returned the company car, and in anticipation of a move to Scotland we bought a new Land Rover.
After Tony passed away, we decided to put an offering to the plot of land up in Scotland, subject to planning.
We worked with our architect friend up there to produce plans for the house. They've been submitted for planning permission, and that approval process was going to take 3 months. I just turned to Chrissy and I said, how would you like to do a long distance cycle ride in Sweden?
Sweden, of all places.
I think it was more out of fear than anything, of not having anything to do. All my friends were at work. I hadn't had any real outside interest, or my whole life had been running the business for the last 18 years, and now all of a sudden I had 3 months of nothing to do.
Paul was worried about what he's going to do after the business is closed, and while we're waiting for the deal to be done.
I'd been reading a blog about an English couple that had cycled from the top of Norway all the way down to the bottom of South Africa, and then they'd shipped their bikes and themselves over to the bottom of South America, and they were heading for Alaska. And they'd written a wonderful blog, really detailed description of what they'd seen and what experiences they'd had, and I was just so inspired, and I felt that Sweden would be an ideal country for us to do something like that. It's a biggish country geographically, but not too many people. I felt the roads would be safe. It's a low crime country, no major wildlife dangers. I was pretty excited by the idea.
I went along with it.
I can't say that Chrissy was as excited. She had a lot of questions. She was worried. She always worries about the unknown.
I know Paul was disappointed that I didn't react more positively, but I had so many questions. How long the trip's going to be. We hadn't got any bikes or any equipment. How much is that going to be? How many miles would we do in a day? Where would we sleep? My biggest problem, would I be fit enough? Paul had all the answers for everything, but as it turned out, not all of them were truthful. I asked if Sweden was hilly.
But she did ask me, I remember asking if Sweden was hilly, and I told her no, it's pretty flat. I didn't know really.
I need to do more research myself and not believe everything he tells me. A bit, but he did dangle a carrot. At the end of the cycle ride, he said we would have a holiday in Sardinia.
Once Chrissy had started to come to terms with the idea, we purchased touring bikes and cooking and camping equipment. And then came the day and we were off, and it was quite an adventure in itself just to get to Gothenburg. We had to get a lift from Chrissy's brother to the ferry at Harwich, and then we took the overnight ferry to the Hook of Holland. We cycled 50 miles from the Hook of Holland to Amsterdam, spent a night in Amsterdam, and then caught the train the next morning across Germany. Changed 3 times, I think, until we arrived at the port of Kiel. From there we caught another ferry, overnight ferry to Gothenburg. And as we departed the ferry, we met with a very kind Swedish gentleman called Ove, who had just returned from his own cycling trip in France. And he offered to show us the route out of Gothenburg and onto a pathway called Sverigeleden, which was a long distance cycle ride that ran from the south into the north of Sweden. And so we followed him for the first 30 minutes, and then after that we were on our own. And I would say for the next 2.5 months we had a real adventure in Sweden. We wild camped in some remote locations. We camped in cabins on campsites. We camped in cabins in the wilderness. We saw some pretty towns, we saw some beautiful countrysides, we even cycled as far north in Sweden as Lapland. We saw wildlife that you would expect to see in Lapland. I think we did over 1,200 miles in that 2.5 months. But it wasn't all sunshine and lollipops. We had rain, we had mosquitoes, we had biting horseflies that drew blood, we had cycle repairs to contend with.
And don't forget the hills, the many, many hills. In fact, it wasn't the hills that were the worst things that I had to put up with. It was the saddle sore and the headwind. And Paul was so inspired by my struggles that he wrote a poem for me.
I was so impressed with Chrissy, the way she performed. Our fitness levels improved over the time, and watching her pushing her bike uphill into a headwind was quite inspirational for me. In fact, I was so inspired, I wrote her a poem. We have brought our bikes to Sweden, the homeland of IKEA. Why she agreed to do this, Chrissy still has no idea. She's much too old and too unfit, she kept on telling herself, but Paul was having none of it and said it will be good for your health. And now she's here and doing it, cycling for miles nearly every day. And while at times she's hating it, she's loving it in a funny sort of way. The pain of going up the hills is gradually getting less, although when her backside will be happy is anybody's guess. The weather has been wonderful, the people have been so kind, the scenery is so beautiful, the roads are lupin lined, the lakes, the trees, the bluest skies, the ever-present smell of pine. When asked how things are going, she said, nearly everything is fine. What's not right, I asked her, and that is when she grinned. The thing not right, she said to me, is
I'm suffering with the wind.
On the whole though, we did have some really superb weather for the majority of the time, but it was the people. The people of Sweden made the trip so special for us. The generosity, we had to be invited into people's houses to watch England play in the World Cup match, even one match against Sweden, to have dinner with people, to in one case sleep in their house overnight, to be given fresh water from the well in their garden. One gentleman even drove 40 miles to bring us waffles and ice cream. We'd met him earlier in the day. So yes, it would definitely be the people that we we met in Sweden that made the trip so memorable, and the freedom of waking up in the morning and not knowing where we would be sleeping that night. It was perhaps the thing that scared us the most before we left, but once we got into the trip and we found that the adventure and the freedom of each day, it was pretty exciting.
It was definitely the people of Sweden that made our adventure special, even if some of them did turn a bit weird in midsummer. He did. After getting to Bergen, he arranged for the bikes to be shipped home, and we caught a flight from Oslo to Sardinia.
I'd had a number of discussions with some Swedish people that all had invited us back to Sweden, but in the winter time they suggested to us that Sweden was a better place to visit in the winter because the outdoor activities, the lakes froze over, so there was ice fishing, there was skating, there was skidooing. So I like the idea of coming back there in winter time, and we just recently bought the Land Rover. So I spent the first few days on the beach in Sardinia studying the iPad to see if I could find ways of modifying the Land Rover to allow us to sleep in it and travel around in it and visit some of the people we'd met on our cycle ride. And it was during that time I came across this term overlanding, a new term to me. I'd never heard of it before. And I was fascinated and surprised at the number of people that there were that converted their vehicles, were living in them and travelling all over.
After cycling a few months in Sweden and Norway, getting to Sardinia, relaxing on a Mediterranean beach with turquoise sea, white sands, I was beginning to relax and not feel all my aches and pains.
I remember, I think it's probably the third or the fourth day of our time in Sardinia, we were on the beautiful beach. Chrissy lay there with her eyes closed.
He looks up to me and says,
"How would you fancy travelling the world in our Land Rover?"